We're into the finals of the Julie Baer Generation Cup. So it's world champion Magnus Carlsen playing against the 19-year-old rising star Arjun Erigaisi. There are so many kids coming through right now, and he's one of them. He's just broken into the 2700 club, and he's even inside the top 20 in the world. So he has the white pieces in this game. He's looking to strike back because in game one he lost to Magnus with black. It was a quiet opening, Magnus squeezed him, really just outplayed him. So what can he do here? He kicks off with pawn to e4. Magnus goes e5. We have an Italian game on the board. I was about to say Roy Lopez. Italian here with bishop to c4. Knight f6 from Magnus. Pawn d3. And Magnus brings this bishop to c5. More aggressive than the e7 square. c3 now from Arjun. So he prepares d4 one day in the future. d6 from Magnus. Castles was played, and now Magnus elects to go for pawn to a5. You can go pawn a6 there. Peter Lecco was talking about some of the subtleties here. This a5 idea, very often it's directed against stopping any white expansion with pawn to b4. So bishop g5 was now played by Arjun. You don't have to do that one. You can do things like rook e1 or knight b to d2, play a lot more slowly, but here the bishop comes a bit more aggressively. Magnus goes pawn h6, it drops back, and these positions are always very double-edged because very often here black's going g5. Let me actually just show this. The bishop drops back and it looks a bit entombed by these dark pawns, although black's arguably created some weaknesses, and you often see the king, castle and kingside there. Lots of different games from that position. But after h6, bishop to h4, Magnus comes up with a completely different idea here. So he blitzes out bishop to d7. Lichess database is showing no game found here. Not always accurate, there could be some games, but it's not in the Lichess database. Now there's a very simple idea behind this. Magnus wants queen e7 and castles queenside. A really nice, aggressive idea to just attack white. So here Arjun starts having a think. He goes rook to e1. Magnus now goes bishop a7. He anticipates pawn d4 later. Knight b to d2 develops. Now Magnus goes g5. The bishop tucks back. And now you could start with queen e7. Peter Lecco, Tanya, they were discussing this. That was the commentary I was watching. But instead Magnus actually drops this knight back first. He wants to come to g6 and then look at these kind of dark squares later in the game. And Arjun now strikes. He goes d4. Thematic break. The knight's just left c6. Doesn't support the d4 square anymore. Magnus now brings it round to g6. And this is actually a pawn sacrifice if Arjun wants it. So he captures here first. Magnus recaptures. And Peter was talking here about the fact you have to really play energetically now as white. But Arjun misses his chance to do so. So he should technically take on e5. But it's very, very tactical because after the knight recaptures, bishop takes, then there's this move of bishop takes on f2 with check. And I'm sure he saw all of this. King takes, knight g4 check, the king goes away, you can't take here with the queen, it's supported by the bishop. And now after the knight takes on e5, well, this just looks really good for black. The bishop's attacked. I mean, say, for example, you nudged it back here, which you very often see. Well, black's just got a great position. Dominant knight on e5. Better pawn structure here. Good position for black. But the move that white has in this position here to keep things balanced even slightly better is knight to f3. Very difficult to see from afar or if you haven't prepared it because you literally are giving up a whole piece, but then you can go queen to d4. This is the trick. You hit the unprotected rook and the knight. Black's best is the castle. Then you pick up the piece back. So this would be a roughly level position. You can go bishop e6, rook e8, etc. This was technically the way to go for white, but very deep stuff. You have to really be prepared to go in for that line. So Arjun doesn't take on e5, that energetic way to play. He instead goes knight f1, very logical move, but now Magnus gets everything he wants. He goes queen e7, knight e3, castles queenside, and he's just got this harmonious position now. An attack could be coming against the white king and this ugly looking bishop on g3. Now this next move needs some explanation because you want to go queen c2, cover this pawn here, connect your rooks, looks very natural, but then black has this unexpected tactic of taking that knight on e3 with the bishop. Now you don't normally want to give up that wonderful bishop, but after rook recaptures, which isn't best, you should actually go with pawn there, which is very ugly. But if you go with the rook, which you would normally want to play, then h5 is the follow-up move. You're threatening to trap the bishop, and if the knight takes this unprotected pawn now, well, you hop in with knight g4, hitting this rook and opening up the queen to attack here, and this is good for black. Basically, you're forced to give up an exchange. If you do take on f7 here, then h4 is coming. Again, this bishop's just running out of squares. All very, very tactical stuff. But Arjun's seen this stuff going on, and that's why here he goes queen to c1. So he adds some extra protection along this e3 square, along this diagonal towards g5, and so in some lines that queen can bounce out, then hit this knight here, etc. Very deep, very tactical, but that's why the queen ends up there. And here Magnus now just brings his rook to the centre of the board. So he adds some protection to this e-pawn so that if the queen ever moves, that one stays protected. And now Arjun just tries to stir things up on the queen side. He goes pawn b4, he's about to get attacked, so he wants to start attacking Magnus. Now this is a pawn sacrifice if Magnus takes it. After recaptures here, then you could take with the queen, but this just isn't a good way to play because bishop takes on f7 is the devastating follow-up. You hit this rook and the unprotected knight, no good for black. So you can't take that pawn twice. Magnus could technically take on e4, this is the top engine line, but it's just so inhuman to play like this because you run into knight d5, hits your queen, after it moves you then pick up a whole piece here. Now there's actually this crazy bishop c6 follow-up and black's technically better. The line gets so complicated, white can go knight takes on e5 or knight d4, but black should emerge a bit better there. Crazy, crazy stuff. Magnus wants none of it, so he doesn't take the pawn on e4, he doesn't take the pawn on b4, instead he just goes pawn a4 here, keeps the lines closed on the queen side so that he can turn his attention to the king side. Knight f5 now from Arjun. He hops in, hits the queen. Now you'd love to chop that one off instantly, but the problem is after pawn takes, the knight has to move and then you're dropping the c5 pawn. So you can't take the knight. Instead this queen, it just drops back to f8, covers this pawn here which is attacked. Now queen c2 played, so it activates now onto the square it wanted to go to and also looks at this pawn now in some lines. So the knight hops into f4, things are hotting up. Arjun brings his rook to the centre here, and now bishop takes on f5 was played, that one's finally eliminated, but here Arjun plays a very unexpected move. Now you can recapture in one, good move, but instead he plays this beautiful queen takes on a4, an intermezzo attacking this bishop, so you don't have time to say take this pawn, win a second one, or then the queen takes on a7 here, and because the rook is cutting the d-file, this is a devastating attack against the black king. So instead Magnus took on d1, this rook recaptured, now he played king to b8, so he covers that bishop, defends it, and now Arjun picks up on f5. e4 now from Magnus, he gets his play going. The knight hops into d4, and now the pawn carries on. That's a real thorn in the white side, very difficult to live with, lots of tactical ideas. So that one was captured, best move. Magnus takes back with the rook, and Arjun now slides back this bishop onto this sensitive diagonal, and he's also setting up a ton of tactics now, because there are ideas of knight c6 check, unleashing the bishop, unleashing the rook down the d-file, very dangerous. And after Magnus goes queen to e7, these are exactly the tricks which Arjun is now suddenly playing for. Now his best move in the position here is to play something a bit slower, like knight to f3, just open up the d-file for the rook, cover his own e1 square, that kind of thing. You can also drop this bishop back to f1, looks a bit passive but it's solid. So there are moves here to keep an equality, but Arjun takes this rook on e3. Now why on earth would he do this? Because the queen now pounces in with check, and if you go to h1, you're not long for this world at all. because this knight is coming to g4 and that's a devastating attack. Now you actually need to take this knight first. Pawn recaptures is forced because if you go with the rook, you leave your back rank. This is actually leading to mate. So after this one here, pawn would have to recapture. Now you go knight to g4, and this attack is just devastating for black, completely winning. -8 computer shows here. So obviously Arjun knew that after queen on e3 check, he couldn't go king to h1. So instead he goes king f1 here. This is what he planned from afar. Again, he wants knight c6 check, so that if Magnus goes knight g4 immediately here, for example, well then there's knight c6 check. Pawn recaptures. Now he can slam down this one, king b7. This is actually checkmate. So these are the problems. Magnus can't do the move he wants to play, and there's only one move in the position here that doesn't just lose on the spot for black. Can you find it if you pause here? So Magnus plays the exceptional move knight 4 to d5, and he said by process of elimination this had to be the move. So the whole idea is that you now block the d file and you now set up these ideas of knight to g4, and Arjun just completely blunders, but it is a tough position. So his best move here is bishop to e2. He has to tuck back and cover that g4 square, but the attack still rages on for black here. You can see that these dark squares are weak. You know, the knight could be taking here. The bishop is a monster. The queen's in the heart of the position. If it ever moved to check from f4, then this knight would have access to e3. So black is definitely for choice here. But Arjun doesn't find bishop e2. Instead, he takes that knight, and now Magnus just springs the trap shut with knight g4. A devastating move because queen f2 mate is threatened and knight h2 mate is threatened because of the fact that the king is just completely boxed in. You can't parry both threats, it's completely over. For example, the best move the engine suggests is queen e8 check, just giving up an entire queen. There's just not a single move in this position, and Arjun resigned here. So Magnus won this game. He then held the draw in the third game with the white pieces, so they didn't need to play the fourth. He takes this first set. They play again tomorrow. Arjun has to strike back, or Magnus will be the winner of this tournament. I hope you enjoyed this game. If you want to see another epic game of chess played by Magnus Carlsen and Hans Niemann, click here. Thanks very much for watching, and see you soon.